Hey, this is Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'll be talking about action selection systems in games. Specifically, my 15 favorite that I came up for this list. I'm sure there's some great systems that I've missed, though, that won't be on this list. So feel free to chime in the comments and share what some of your favorites are. So what am I talking about here in action selection? Specifically, I'm talking about games where on your turn, you have multiple different actions you can choose from. And I'll quantify it and just say more than two, because there are lots of games where you can choose like to do one thing or pass, or just do the one thing, do the thing that you do in that game. And so there are lots of games with very interesting decisions that don't really have action selection systems. They just have their decision space elsewhere. But this is a little bit nuanced. I'm sure an argument could be made for any number of games about whether or not they have an action selection system. And I will say, to start off here, one that you probably heard me talk about a lot if you follow this channel is that I do not like action checklists. So that's when in a game you have like 4 action points and you can use them to do these things on your turn. You have to look through this long list of, usually it's on like a little reference card. You look through this list and you say, okay, I can do this one twice, I'll do this one once. I do not like that. That is my strong personal preference. I understand there's some freedom in doing that because it gives players a lot of freedom, but it constantly reminds me that I am in a game and I'm looking through a checklist rather than letting me immerse myself in the game and immerse myself in what I think is oftentimes a much more interesting mechanical puzzle that can emerge when that checklist is built into the user interface of the game. And so you'll see a lot of examples of that in this list. Before I jump in, some honorable mentions, just some quick ones that came to mind. Again, I think you can probably mention many more in the comments, but a few that came to mind were Stardew Valley, Kemet, and Now or Never. All have really interesting action systems that didn't quite make the list. Let's start with one that did make the list, and this is debatable as to whether or not this should be on here, but it is Keyforge. And Keyforge, I think, has a really interesting action selection system for a game that is essentially just cards. It is just cards. There are a few tokens that you can use, but it's just cards. In Keyforge, you have a hand of cards and you're building a tableau of cards on the table. And each Keyforge deck is comprised of 3 different factions. And on your turn, what you're doing is selecting one of those factions to activate. And when you do, that means that you can play any cards from your hand that have that faction. So you can see there's no casting cost to play this card. All it is this faction. So you're activating that faction for the turn. So any cards that have that faction that you choose, you can play them. And any factions that already are in any cards from that faction that are already in your tableau, you can activate them if you want, or you can attack with them. You can do whatever you want with them. It's such an elegant system, but it is beautiful in execution. Just how you're choosing one faction. That faction, all the things that can emerge from that specific faction can be really, really cool. And because it's a random draw in this game, you can end up with a hand of cards. You can kind of build this hand of cards so that you are building up to a hand where you have a ton of this specific faction, say, and you play that faction all at once. But there's still an interesting decision space there because the cards that you have on the table in your tableau may be of the other factions that you've used on a previous turn. And so do you play more cards of a new faction, or do you hold them back for another turn in the future and just activate a faction of which you already have a lot of cards on the table? It's a great decision space. It's a really cool system, and I'd love to see this in more games. That's Keyforge. Keyforge's action selection system, or faction selection system in Keyforge. At number 14, I have our new game, Libertalia, Winds of Galecrest. You will see a few Stonemaier games on this list. I don't always do that, but this list I felt appropriate because I really do like the action selection system in Libertalia. The actions are essentially built into the cards themselves. Each card has one or more actions that's triggered either during the day, and I'll show you some cards while I'm talking about it, during the day, during the dusk when you're gathering loot tokens, in the evening, or at the end of each voyage. Arguably, the evening and voyage actions aren't really actions. Those things are just happening. But the daytime and dusk abilities definitely feel a lot more like actions. And one of the key reasons I wanted to put this game on the list, here's some cards that you can see that have different actions that you're taking with these cards. One of the reasons I wanted to put this on this list is that Libertalia is simultaneous. So I wanted one game on this list that had simultaneous action. So you were choosing one of these cards from your hand and you were revealing it simultaneously and then activating their abilities in a specific order. I don't know if Libertalia is exactly the best example of this, but I like games with characters that have a lot of different abilities. Even though what you're doing is playing a character, that is the action, you're playing a character. It can actually feel like a much larger array of actions when each character is unique. And I also like Libertalia as an example, as I said, for simultaneous play, when you have simultaneous actions happening rather than each player choosing actions one at a time. So Libertalia Winds of Galecrest is at number 14 on this list. At number 13 is a game that I just recently played, and that is Ankh, Gods of Egypt. You can see some photos of my recent play of it here. And Ankh, I really, really liked the action selection system in it because this system is a shared action selection system. You have 4 actions you can take. They're all printed on the board up here, and players share action tokens. And so if I take, say, a move action, I take that action and I move the move token. I advance the move token forward 1 space on this track. And then if another player takes it, they do the same. They advance that token on the track. When the token gets to the end of the track, the player that does that, their turn ends, but they get a benefit based on the events track. So you move the event track 1 space forward at that point in time. They get a benefit from it, or something happens in the game at that point in time, usually at least slightly benefiting them as well. So even though it's essentially, so this is, I think, a great example of this. It's essentially an action checklist where you have 4 different actions that you can take on your turn. You can take up to 2 of those actions in a specific order. But because it has this shared interface, your attention is pulled from what would otherwise be a little checklist in front of you to this common shared space on the board where you have this wonderful interaction with the other players. I think that's a really, really brilliant implementation of a shared action checklist in Ankh, Gods of Egypt. That's number 13 on the list. At number 12, I have Clans of Caledonia. This one is interesting because what you are essentially just doing on each turn is buying something. So it's an economic system, economic game, but what you're buying is the action itself. So you have a bunch of money that you get at the beginning of each round, and you are spending that money each turn to buy a thing and trigger an action. And those things are all on your player mat. You're pulling tokens off your player mat. You're putting them on the board. You are paying to visit the market to exchange goods there. You're paying for some other upgrades. Everything you're doing involves money. You're spending money. So it's essentially like a bunch of different action points that you're spending, but in the form of currency that you're spending to do something on your mat. And every little bit of it has a sense of progression to it. As I'm saying that, I'm thinking of the game Orleans, which also has a really cool simultaneous action selection system. I should have probably put that on that list. We'll throw Orleans on there as an honorable mention. But yeah, the Clans of Caledonia, I really like the get a bunch of money and spend it on different actions on your player mat throughout the round, getting better in terms of income and actions as you do so. That's Clans of Caledonia at number 12. And number 11 is The King is Dead. This is kind of similar to a few other games that I'll mention on this list, but the main reason I wanted to mention Kings is Dead is that at the beginning of the game, you get a hand of cards. I believe it's 10 cards, maybe 12. And those, the actions that you have available to you in the game are printed on each of those cards. And once you use one of those cards, it is done for the game. So the game is essentially giving you 10 actions to use over the course of the entire game. And it doesn't really give you restrictions on when you have to use them because one of the decisions, you can either play a card or you can pass in this game. And so you could use all of your turns to pass if you wanted. You could do that if you wanted. You could also spend all 10 cards if you wanted before you passed even a single time. You probably wouldn't do either of those things, but it's nice that you have the freedom to do so. And because when you use one of those cards, it's out of the game permanently, every game has this huge weight on it. Every decision you make, every action you take, has this immense weight on top of it. I just really love this system that you give players all these cards at the beginning of the game and say, hey, here are all your cards. They are freely available to you. You have them all right now. You can use them as you wish, but once you do, you're done with them. You can't use them again. That's why The King is Dead is my number 11 favorite action selection system. Now we're in the top 10. At number 10, I have the Whatnot Cabinet. The Whatnot Cabinet has a great little interactive system in it where you are, let's see if I can find the player mat, yeah, or the action selection mat. You have this little mat here, and on your turn, you are choosing one of these columns to take with each of which has their own action. Once you choose the column, another player can't choose it, and if you choose earlier, if you choose like this first column here, you're getting the weakest version of the action. So all the actions are kind of built around getting some tiles and placing them on your mat, but they're all structured in a slightly different way. There's less agency with this one. You're doing a random draw, whereas you get more and more agency, more and more choice, and I think more and more tiles as you go further down this row. However, the position you choose is also your turn order for the following round. So not only are you making a choice for this round based on agency and control and number of tiles, but you're also determining your turn order for the following round. It's a really a simple system, but I love the interaction of it. Which do you choose? Which do you not want an opponent to choose? And so on. Really great action selection system in the Whatnot cabinet at number 10 on this list. At number 9 on the list, I have an action selection system I created, and that is for the game. I only have the recent expansion here because it's kind of a heavy game to hold up. That is Tapestry. Tapestry's action selection system is on any given turn, you're either going to take an advanced turn or you'll take an income turn. Income turn, you'll do a bunch of stuff, you'll gain income, but the advanced turn is kind of the meat of the game. And the way that works is on one of the 4 tracks, or 5 tracks if you play with the Arts and Architecture expansion, you are going to simply advance on a track. You'll pay a cost, you'll advance on that track, and you'll gain the benefit of the space that you advance to. And you're advancing just one space. And so on any given turn, you have 4 different things to choose from. You have 4 different tracks that you could advance on. And that decision has a pretty big impact on your civilization. Which track are you going to move forward on? Which actions are you going after? Which types of actions? Because the actions are different, or the benefits are different on each of the tracks. The resources that you're spending on each of the tracks also become more and more specific the further you get on the track. And you're also always looking at your opponents. Which tracks are they advancing on versus you? Because on any track, if you were the first player to move from one era to the next, one tier to the next, it's called in the game, one tier, you gain a special landmark miniature that goes in your capital city. So you kind of want to be the first player to advance on at least one track so that you can gather those landmarks and place them in your capital city. It's a very simple action selection system, and it was kind of inspired by A Feast for Odin, which has a lot of different actions you can choose from at any given time, with a pretty solid worker placement system in A Feast for Odin. But it's also daunting to have like 60 plus actions to choose from. So in Tapestry, you have 48 different benefits to choose from, but at any given time, you only have 4 of them available to you. Yeah, it's a system that I really like. I'd love to see it in another game as well. So if anyone wants to copy that system, use it elsewhere, I will gladly play that game. But that is Tapestry at number 9. And number 8 is Tokaido. Tokaido is one of the first games that had a one-way action selection track, with the core of it being that you will choose a space ahead of you on a track that is not occupied by another player, and that does not go beyond a certain point. There are limitations in Tokaido. And it is your turn in Tokaido if you are the player who is furthest back on the path. So the furthest back player will choose a space ahead of them, and they will go to that space, and they will take the action of that space. It's often a benefit like gain a card or pay something to gain some victory points, things like that. So I think there are 5 or 6 different types of actions along this track. But I love the system of the player who's furthest in the back, the player who's essentially spent the least amount of time moving forward so far. They will move forward to a space of their choosing, take that action, and then again, players will look at the player who is furthest in the back of this path, and it is their turn. It's a great system. I have a whole video about this type of system, but I think Tokaido is one of the most elegant representations of this action selection system, the one-way action selection track. And that's why it's at my number 8 spot on this list. And number 7, I wanted to choose Scythe because this is a system that originally showed up in Scythe, and maybe it's in another game too, but I think Scythe is the first game where I saw it. But it is the system where you were taking a top row action and a bottom row action, and those actions are asymmetrically oriented on player mats. However, what I'm holding up to you now is not Scythe, but instead Marvel Villainous, or Villainous, any style of Villainous. Each player in Villainous has their own Villainous player mat with 4 different sections, and on your turn, you are choosing one of those sections and you're taking the top row benefits, and then you're gaining the bottom row benefits. And I believe in Villainous, you can take them in any order. In Scythe, you can either take the top row, the bottom row, or the top row, then the bottom row, or neither. You can do one of those things. But the key similarity between these two games is that the section that you choose, you can't use it on sequential turns. So if I choose this section on my next turn, I need to choose one of the other sections. The other nice little twist that Villainous does is you can kind of upgrade slots by playing cards below them, and your opponents can end up putting, I think they're called event cards, some kind of cards, above them. They can end up blocking your top row actions, which is a really interesting level of player interaction in this game, where if they play a card here, they are blocking the top of this section. Really cool action selection system in Villainous. I love top row, bottom row stuff. It makes you feel powerful when you're able to really gain the full benefits of both the top row and the bottom row. Villainous is a little different than Scythe too, in that all the benefits are, I would say, quite equal, but on any given turn, you can probably take all of the benefits on a section, whereas in Scythe, the top row benefits are weaker and easier to take, and the bottom row benefits are very strong, very engine building, like they're about building your engine. You're gaining a mech, you're getting an upgrade, something like that, but you have to pay for it. And so it feels good on the turns that you're able to do a top row and a bottom row action in Scythe. But again, both of them share the similarity that you have different sections of your player mat that you can upgrade and improve, and you can't choose the same section twice in a row. That's Villainous at number 7. At number 6, we have another, well, not another Stonemaier game, but a Stonemaier game, Viticulture. I wanted an example of worker placement because I think worker placement is a great system to share when you're talking about action selection, because the actions that you can choose from are organically built into the board itself, into the user interface. In Viticulture, and I think Viticulture does some pretty good things with worker placement, if I may say so myself. I'm the designer of Viticulture. So you're choosing an action in Viticulture, and the actions in Viticulture are staggered, or the number of actions are staggered based on player count. And some of those actions have bonuses on them. So not only are you taking the action, but if you were the first to get there, oftentimes you will choose the bonus option, so you get the bonus in addition to the action. So I think that feels good. The other neat thing that Viticulture does, in my opinion, is the seasonal system here. This is the original board. The Tuscany board has 4 different seasons, 4 different worker placement seasons. But you have a few different workers that you can use each year, but you can only place one worker once per year. And so the decision point in Viticulture is, do I place a worker on one of these actions in the summer, or do I hold them for the winter? And this not only is an interesting choice for you by yourself, but also as you look at other players to see what they're doing, what they're going for, what they're building towards, and how many workers they're holding over, can help you decide, okay, do I want to get clogged up in a really busy winter, or do I want to use my actions in the summer now, use my workers in the summer? So worker placement in general, I think, is a great action selection system. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so popular. Instead of having an action checklist, you have those actions built into the board. And I think Viticulture is one of many great examples you can find in that genre. So that's Viticulture at number 6. We're into the top 5 now. At number 5, I have a much smaller game, and that is Hanamikoji. Let me show you what happens in Hanamikoji, because in Hanamikoji, it is a tug-of-war game where you're trying to win the influence over some geisha. And each player, each round, has 4 different actions they can take, and they will take all 4 of those actions. So you have these 4 little tokens, 4 actions, and you're going to take all of them. So, but the key is you're going to take them in an order of your choosing, and you will select cards from your hand as you wish for each of these actions. For example, this one says remove 2 cards. Just get rid of 2 cards. And this is important because you're using these cards to gain influence over geisha. Specific cards are aligned with specific geisha. So you're just removing 2 cards. This one says reserve a card secretly. So you get to reserve a card that your opponent doesn't know about. And there are a few I cut, you choose one. So this one says choose 3 cards. Your opponent chooses one of them, gains one of them, and you gain the other 2. This one says divide cards into 2 piles. Your opponent chooses one pile, you choose the other pile. And that's it. Those are all the actions in the game. It's super easy to teach, but the decision space here, the order in which you choose these and the cards that you use for each of them is wonderful. It is a fantastic action selection system. And I'd love to see this actually system in other games too. It works so well, especially with the I cut you choose elements in it. That is Hanamikoji at number 5 on this list. At number 4, we have another worker placement game, but my focus here isn't on the worker placement. That is Honeybuzz. Honeybuzz has a wonderful worker placement system where what you're doing is you're placing a number of workers on an action that is one more than the previous stack of workers on that action. That in itself is a great worker placement system. However, the really cool system in Honeybuzz is that you are placing, here you can see it on the back of the box, on almost every turn, you are gaining one of these tiles and placing it in your hive. And if you complete a hexagon of tiles here, you get to gain all of the benefits of the tiles that are within that hexagon. So not only do you have this action selection system of which workers do you place, where do you place your workers or worker, but you have this secondary action system of all these benefits that you're triggering based on what you're putting in your hive. That system itself feels really, really good because you're building something as you go and you're triggering all these actions as you go, and that feels amazing. So Honeybuzz is a really, really great action selection system based on this tableau that you're building and what you're triggering from turn to turn. That's Honeybuzz at number 4. At number 3, I have the last Stonemaier game on this list, and that is Wingspan. I love Wingspan's action selection system. It evolved a lot during the development process. Originally, I think it was actually an action checklist very, very early on. And Elizabeth explored a bunch of different options for action selection. I think there was a rondelle at one point, but we settled on this player mat system in Wingspan. Let me see if I can easily pull out a player mat here to show you. No, it's at the bottom. They're at the bottom. But in Wingspan, you are choosing one row of your player mat to activate. There are just 4 different actions in Wingspan. But so many things could happen from those 4 actions. One is play a bird, one is to gain some food, one is to lay eggs, and one is to draw more cards. Very simple to teach those actions. But the key part of the system in Wingspan is that as you play birds in those 4 rows, here I can show you the bottom of the box. There are the habitat mats. As you play bird cards in 3 of the rows, one of the rows isn't really a row, it's just the play a bird action. But as you play birds in them, you are improving the core benefits that you're gaining from choosing that row. And many of the birds have when activated abilities. And so each turn the row that you select, you are starting with the basic benefit from that row, whatever it is currently at, whatever strength it's currently at, and then you're moving down the row from right to left, activating all those bird abilities. And so what starts off as very easy to explain, very basic actions, ramp up to these really powerful turns where you are gaining a really powerful core benefit and then activating multiple birds as you move down this row. It's a wonderful action selection system. I love what Elizabeth did with it, and I had to put it on this list because I really, really do adore it. That's Wingspan at number 3 on this list. And number 2 is a game that I don't own, but I do really enjoy, and that is Concordia. I really enjoy Concordia's action selection system, which is you have a hand of cards. You have the same hand of cards as any other player, and on your turn, you play one of those cards. All of the actions in the game are on those cards, and they're described in text on the cards, which I think is really, really helpful. You play one of those cards, and it is out of your hand. And then at a certain point, you will play a card to return all the cards that you played back to your hand. There are other games like Flotilla and Aquatica also do this and do it well, but I think it's a great, elegant system because all the actions you need to know are right there in front of you in your hand, and over the course of the game, you can gain more cards that have better versions of those actions. It's this great hand-building system that has no randomness to it. You're not randomly drawing a few of these cards like in a deck-building game. You just have all those cards, and you're playing one of them on your turn. It's a great, great system. That's Concordia at number 2. At number 1, though, we have a very recent favorite of mine, Ark Nova. Ark Nova has a wonderful system that was originally introduced in Civilization: A New Dawn, but I just like Ark Nova more, so it's on this list. But in Ark Nova, you have 5 cards. I'll pull them out here. 5 different actions that you can take. That's it. 5 actions. Again, very easy to teach these core actions, although the complexity of the game is fairly high. You're impacting a lot of different things here. And these cards are in order under your player mat, directly under numbers 1 through 5. And those numbers correspond to the benefits you get. For example, so this card says you will draw cards equal to, so you're gaining cards, these cards that you could later on play, equal to your current power. So if this card is on the 4th space at number 4, it means that you'll just draw 2 cards. So the strength of each of these cards gets better depending on where they are in this row. And when I use this card, if I use this from the number 4 slot, I will remove it from that slot, slide it down to the number 1 slot, and slide all the other cards to the right. So the card that was at the 3 slot is now in the 4 slot, and so on. So every time you use an action, it gets weak again, and other actions get stronger. On top of that, though, is the fact that you can upgrade these cards. So this is the basic version of this card. There's a point in the game where you can upgrade it and it gets even better. So you can see now in the 4 slot, I will draw 3 cards and discard 1. So that every element of this card got better. And that's the case for all of these. All of these have a basic version that gets better based on where it is in that action row, and an upgraded side that still gets better for where it is in that action row, but is just inherently better because you have now upgraded that card. It's a wonderful system. I love this system. I think we're going to see other designers play around with it now that Ark Nova has gotten so popular recently. And I look forward to seeing what other designers do with it, because it's a really, really cool system. And currently, I would say that is my number 1 favorite action selection system. But all of these are really, really interesting systems. And like I said, I'm sure I missed some other great systems on this list. So I'd love to hear your favorite action selection systems in the list below. And feel free to, if you want, defend the action checklist that I don't like. Or not defend it, but if you really like it for some reason, let me know in the comments why you really enjoy action checklists. But I'm more interested in games that integrate that action, the action choices into the user interface of the game. I'd love to hear more about them in the comments below. Thanks.